All right, what's up guys? Hope you're doing well. Before we dive into this video, I just wanted to say check out this shirt design that I came up with. I'm honestly pretty proud of it and I thought it was pretty clever. If you guys like it too, leave a comment down below and maybe we'll turn it into some Premiere Pro merch someday. But anyways, with that ironic piece out of the way for this video, let's go ahead and talk about my first week of learning DaVinci Resolve. Now in this video, I'm not gonna cover every single thing that I learned in Resolve for my first week because honestly, there would just be a lot of little boring details that I don't really think anyone would care about. So I'm gonna try and condense this to the things that I thought were the most valuable or the things that I found most different with Resolve coming from Premiere, things that were good, bad, or just different that I think would be helpful for you. So my first week with Resolve was pretty interesting. There were a lot of things that were very frustrating, some things that I thought were pretty nice, and other things that were just kind of confusing. Trying to switch to another NLE can honestly be pretty difficult because there's a lot of phrasing or terminology that is just not consistent across NLEs, which we'll get to that a little bit more later, but that added to some of the confusion with learning Resolve. So the first thing that I want to talk about are databases inside of Resolve. If you're coming from Premiere Pro, then you're already familiar with project files. With project files, all you have to do is double click it, it'll open Premiere and load the project up as long as you have access to the media that is inside of that project file. You can upload these to the cloud to send to other people, you can put them on external drives, you can move them to other machines. As long as that project file can access the original media, you can open it on any machine that has Premiere Pro. Now, if you're coming to Resolve, it works quite a bit different and it took a little bit of studying for me to kind of get my head around how all of this works. So like I said, Resolve calls these databases, and basically a database holds all of your project files for Resolve. You can create as many databases as you want, but by default, Resolve will create one on your internal drive. Once you have a database, you can create any amount of project files that you want inside of this database. From what I found so far, the general consensus seems to be that you want to use the database that is on your internal drive instead of storing them on an external drive or anywhere else. It seems like it is an option to do that, but it is recommended that you use the database on your internal drive. So since everything works around these databases, I got to wondering, well then how do you move project files to another computer or an external hard drive? With Premiere Pro, I have one master project file that has all of my assets, my project files, my graphics, music, everything. So if I want to put that on an external drive, all I have to do is grab that folder, put it on an external drive, and any computer I open it with that has Premiere will open just fine. Doesn't quite work like that with Resolve. It is possible to clone a database and then put that on an external drive, but like I said, that doesn't seem to be the way that is recommended to work. What I found so far is once you have a project file, if you want to move that to another machine or an external drive, you can right click on your project file and then export it, and this is going to export a .drp file, and then on your other computer or whatever mobile machine you want to work on, you can put that .drp file on an external drive, and then you're going to import that .drp file into the database on your other machine. Once it's imported, you can open it up and it would function just like you would moving a project file between different computers. But I do have a few problems with this, at least the way that I like to work, and maybe there's an easy recommendation around this, and if you guys know of another way, feel free to let me know. But it seems like if I was working on my desktop and then wanted to take the project on my laptop, I would need to export the .drp file, move it to my laptop, import it, and then I could start working again. And now if I want to bring that back to my desktop, I need to export another .drp file, import it to the database on my desktop, and then continue editing. And as you can imagine, if you were going back and forth between your different machines, this seems like it would get pretty convoluted pretty quickly. Whereas with the Premiere Pro project file, all I have to do is plug in my external drive, click the project file, and I'm good to go. Now, personally for me right now, I'm not using my laptop that much, so it really isn't that big of a deal to me, but I used to be using my laptop and desktop significantly more, and I know there are plenty of people who bounce between multiple machines. So if you're not bouncing between multiple machines, this probably doesn't matter at all, but if you do, I don't know, that seems like it would be pretty annoying, but who knows, maybe there's a workaround that I just haven't found yet, but I did do a fair amount of Googling and that was the best suggestion that I seem to have found. Now with databases, another thing is that anytime you hop between a major version of Resolve, like 17 to 18, you need to upgrade your databases, and they always recommend that you back them up before you upgrade them. To me, this is similar to when you update Premiere Pro from like version 14 to version 15 or 2020 to 2021, and then it tells you that it isn't going to be backwards compatible and you need to upgrade your project file. So that seems fine, but you need to make sure you upgrade your database, because I can only imagine if you had 200, 300, 400 project files and you forgot to back this up and something got corrupt and you just lost all of them, well, now all your project files are gone. So it seems like you have to be a little bit more careful about your backups, because at least with Premiere Pro project files, if one of my project files got messed up, it doesn't mess up all the ones I just did for the last several years, but it seems like that would be a possibility with Resolve. I haven't run into any posts yet of anyone saying that upgrading a database caused corruption and they lost all their projects, but that does just seem like a point of failure to me. And really all this means is that you just need to remember to back up your databases somewhat frequently, which isn't a huge deal, but it does seem like an extra step coming from Premiere. One thing I will say that is kind of nice about the databases is you can create folders inside of folders to organize your different projects. So for example, my page right now is a complete mess, but I do have a YouTube folder, and then inside of that I have my Learning Resolve in 30 Days series, and if I had any other series, I would put those in different folders as well, and then I could store the rest of my YouTube project files inside of here. So in terms of your organizing structure and keeping the project files separated, it seems like this has a pretty good system for doing that. So next up, I'm gonna be skipping around here, but I wanna talk about time remapping. Time remapping inside of Resolve is actually pretty nice, but also kind of annoying at the same time. I'm sure a lot of you Premiere users are familiar with the fact that if you do any form of time remapping or speed changes, you now can't apply Warp Stabilizer. Instead, what you have to do is do your time remapping, nest, and then warp stabilize, or you have to warp stabilize, nest, and then do time remapping. This is annoying to a lot of people, and understandably so. Well, in Resolve, that's not an issue you have. You can time remap, do any speed changes you want, and throw a stabilizer on it, and it works perfectly fine. In fact, the results that I saw with it were pretty impressive overall. And on that note, the stabilizer in Resolve on average was about 40 to 60% faster than Premiere Pro, even after the 2021 Premiere Pro update, which made Warp Stabilizer 4 times faster. I compared Resolve and Premiere Pro with different clips of varying lengths, and Resolve was faster in every single instance. I didn't necessarily find a huge difference in terms of how much better Resolve or Premiere stabilized. There were a couple clips where Resolve did do a better job, and quite a bit better, but most of them looked about the same to me. My guess is that it really just depends on what you're stabilizing. Premiere may do better in some instances, and Resolve may do better in other instances. Another nice thing about time remapping in Resolve is that you can actually map a shortcut to pull up time remapping, unlike inside of Premiere Pro. I've had a macro for a few years that I can press and it will switch the clip from opacity to time remapping, so it feels about the same to me, but this is definitely a win for Resolve because I have no idea why Premiere hasn't added this yet. Time remapping is something all of us use. I don't know why we have to right click and go through a bunch of menus to find this when Resolve just lets you click one button and boom, you can start time remapping. Now, another thing I really like about the time remapping in Resolve is it is slightly more intuitive. I've always found that the Premiere Pro time remapping isn't that bad. A lot of people disagree with me, but for the most part, it's always made pretty clear sense to me, except in maybe a few small instances. In Resolve, it feels pretty intuitive overall. If you grab the top marker of your speed point and drag it, this is going to change the time or speed that your clip is going to be. If I drag it closer to another speed point, that area is going to be faster. If I drag it further away, it's going to be slower. And then if you want to change where the speed point is for time remapping, you can drag the bottom point and that will adjust where the time remapping will start and stop. This is the part I will say is definitely more intuitive than Premiere. I really like the fact that there are two separate handles which make it very obvious whether you are adjusting the speed or actually moving the speed point. But now I'm gonna say one thing that I feel really annoys me about Resolve's time remapping, and I cannot believe this is not a thing. And if it is, please feel free to tell me. I would love to be wrong, but I've done plenty of Googling and people were even requesting this on the forums, and that's that you can't add a speed point to your clip with a keyboard shortcut. You have to go down to the little menu, click it, and then click Add Speed Point. This to me is absolutely ridiculous. In Premiere, all I have to do is hold down Command and click the line, and this will add a speed point or a keyframe, And it's really quick. So if I'm doing a bunch of time remapping, super fast to do. Whereas in Resolve, I have to go down, click this menu, click add speed point, do my adjustment, add another speed point. If I was doing a ton of time remapping, this would honestly just be so annoying. I cannot believe that this is some kind of oversight where you can't add that as a keyboard shortcut. I don't know, that's ridiculous to me. I personally think if you were trying to do time remapping quickly, this kind of kills it for Resolve. Overall, I do think that Resolve has better time remapping features. Not that the overall result is better though. I just think that intuitively it is easier to understand for someone coming into Resolve. I think you could make identical time remapping results in Resolve or Premiere, doesn't really matter, but I gotta say, it's really nice that I can add the speed points in Premiere really quickly, whereas in Resolve, it's a few extra steps. So next up, we're gonna talk about rendering. And this had me confused for several days because there are 3 separate ways you can render inside of Resolve, and they're not named very well, which makes it kind of confusing. So if you're coming from Premiere, all you have to do to render a clip is you set an in point and an out point, and then you can render that selection. Anything that you rendered will now play back very smoothly. That's awesome, right? Well, in Resolve, there's basically 3 different layers to rendering. You have the render output fusion cache, you have the render output color cache. Now, before we get into what all of that is, the other thing is you can't just set an in and out point and then render that section of the timeline. It works very differently from that. How it ends up working is you need to go to the playback menu and then render cache, and you're going to see 3 different options. You have none, smart, and user. If none is selected, it's not going to cache anything on the system. If you have smart enabled, this will automatically cache clips on your timeline that are too intensive for Resolve to play back automatically. This could be things like clips that are H.265, effects like time remapping or fusion effects, or any text titles that you might add. Generally, anything that is too intense for Resolve to play back, it's going to automatically cache when smart is turned on. This doesn't mean it will cache everything, and we'll get to that in just a minute though. Now, if you go to user, you need to tell Resolve what you want it to cache. So once you're on user, you can right click your clips, and then you can go down to render cache fusion output. There's auto, on, and off. If it's off, Resolve isn't going to cache this clip. When on is selected, it will make sure to cache that clip. And auto, I believe, is a balance of the system will recognize when it thinks it's too hard and then decide if it wants to cache that or not. What I have found with smart and auto is that it doesn't always do a great job of deciding what to cache. Sometimes something doesn't play back at all. It's playing back at like 2 frames a second, and it's still not caching it. So sometimes I found using user and then forcing it to cache has been the way to go. Now, one of the other layers to the caching is the color output cache. And this is for grading. Basically, if you're grading, there is a separate cache that can cache the grade of your clip. And this is separate from the cache that had to do with time remapping, H.265, titles, and heavy effects. And at first, this really annoyed me because you need to tell it to cache the color grade and also tell it to cache those other heavy effects. So to me, it felt really stupid that I have to tell Resolve, hey, yeah, this isn't playing back. Can you cache this, 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 and this? Instead of just doing it for me. In Premiere, I set an in and out point and it renders everything out for me, and now it's cached and ready to go. In Resolve, it doesn't work like that. And this annoyed me until I realized that there is a nice benefit of this. And that benefit is the fact that if the color and the other effects are separate, when you make certain changes to your clip, it doesn't have to recache every single effect. In Premiere, if you make any change to a clip after you've rendered it, whether you change the position, you adjust the color a little bit, or change an effect parameter, you have to re-render that entire clip. Whereas in Resolve, if you cache the color grade and then you make a speed ramp change, it doesn't have to recache the color grade because the color grade was already cached. So this means you can cache things one at a time, and then it will hold and remember those even when you make other changes. So overall, this can help with not having to deal with really long render times, because let's say you had denoiser, time remapping, some compositing effects, and a title. In Premiere, you'd have to re-render those every single time, even if you only changed one of those effects. Whereas in Resolve, if I cache my color grade, my time remapping, and some denoiser, now if I make some changes to my color, I can render the color back out, but I don't have to change the time remapping. Or vice versa, if I change my time remapping but don't change my color grade, well, the color grading's already cached and I don't have to recache it. So basically, keeping the render cache separate in these different ways does have its upsides, but in terms of learning it in the beginning, it's a lot more confusing. Also, Resolve does have an auto caching in the background after a certain amount of time, and I think that that's really nice because if I forgot to cache something before walking away from my system, I know that it's probably going to be cached when I come back. Now, the only thing I have noticed is sometimes the red bar will appear saying that it needs to cache and I'll stop doing anything, and I have mine set to after 1 second of idle, start caching. And sometimes it won't start caching unless I have played that clip back for like 1 second. If I've let it play back at all, then it'll start generating the cache. But other times if I don't do that, it won't cache in the background. I don't really know what that's all about. I don't know if that's something on my end, Resolve's end, or what the problem is there, but it is something I have noticed. So overall, the naming conventions when it comes to rendering or caching inside of Resolve is just confusing. I don't know why the main form of caching is called Fusion Cache Output, because it's not only caching Fusion effects, it's time remapping, H.265, some raw formats. So the title Fusion just seems confusing. I don't know why we don't just call it caching or timeline caching. I don't know, it just seems weird that it would be called Fusion caching since it isn't specific to only Fusion. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is optimized media and proxies in Resolve. This was confusing to me at first because optimized media is actually the term that Resolve has used for what we call proxies in Premiere. Though this has changed a little bit in Resolve 17, and we'll get to that in a minute. But basically, optimized media acts the same exact way as proxies in Premiere. If you highlight all of your media and select Generate Optimized Media, this is going to generate proxies for whatever clips you selected, and the format they will be in is decided based on the settings you chose in your master settings in your project tab. So make sure that you know what format these are actually being generated in. You don't want to just guess. Go to the gear icon, go to the master settings tab, and then if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the codec options for optimized media. So okay, that's basically how you generate proxies inside of Resolve. Now, there's another thing that's called timeline proxy mode. And at first, you're gonna be like, oh, well, we have another option for proxies, right? No, what that actually refers to is the playback resolution of your timeline. In Premiere, in our program monitor, we have a little box and we can change our playback resolution right from there. But we don't call this proxies. So to me, it's really confusing that they call this a proxy for your timeline when all it's doing is changing the playback resolution. You're not actually generating new proxy clips for your timeline. And to make things even more confusing, in Resolve 17, they actually did add a proxy feature. So now optimized media and proxies are two separate features. So if you right-click your clips, there's also an option to generate proxies. And a lot of what I've seen so far is people think that the line is pretty blurred between optimized media and proxies because they essentially do the same exact thing. You can generate them in whatever codec, resolution, and format you want. The way I kind of see it is that you would use optimized media if you wanted to do what we would call transcoding inside of Premiere Pro, and then you could use the proxies feature exactly how you would use proxies in Premiere Pro. So while it is confusing that they basically function as the same exact thing, I can kind of see how you might want to use one or the other, but it wouldn't surprise me if in the future Resolve does away with the terminology optimized media. But basically all you need to know is that optimized media functions the same as proxies in Premiere, but Resolve also does now have an option called proxies for actually generating real proxies. Also, timeline proxy mode just refers to the resolution at which your timeline will play back at. So personally, I find the terms for rendering and caching in Resolve, as well as proxies and optimized media, to be really confusing. Once you know the terminologies, it's not really anything bad or different. It's not like they function drastically different, but it is confusing when you're learning. So just something to be aware of with all of those. All right, so next up, I just want to talk about some audio things that I discovered inside of Resolve. I didn't get to do a very big deep dive into audio, but I did get to go over audio syncing as well as some small things that I observed that were pretty nice inside of Resolve, if I'm going to be honest. The first thing is that there are multiple ways to sync audio in Resolve, but the main and most common way that people will probably do it is pretty nice. And that's when you sync them, it's actually going to take the audio file and embed it into the clip inside of Resolve. So this means once they're synced up, whether you watch it in your source monitor, on the timeline, or wherever in Resolve, it's going to be using the good audio. Whereas in Premiere Pro, I would take the audio and put it down on my timeline, put the video down there, sync them, and now if I watch that video back in the source monitor, it's going to be the original camera audio. It doesn't take the good audio with it. In Resolve, no matter where I watch it, I'm going to be able to hear the good audio. You also have the option to append the original camera audio with the new audio so that anytime you drag it to the timeline, you have both sources of audio in case you want them. So I do think that's a pretty awesome feature of Resolve, but I will say the only thing that I'm not really sure I understand or how it works is that once you sync that audio, let's say you got rid of the original audio track from the camera, once you put it down to the timeline, the audio doesn't have the same original name that it came into Resolve with. The audio title gets renamed to match the camera clip. So if you right click and say reveal in media pool, it's actually going to show you just the original video clip and not link back to the original audio clip. In general, if you're doing a small project, this probably isn't a very big deal, but I could see where if you were doing a documentary or a much bigger project, if you synced all of your audio this way and needed to refer back to your original camera audio to make some changes, now it's going to be a lot harder to find that or know which one was synced to your camera if Resolve doesn't tell you on the timeline. It kind of just makes you think that the audio you synced was the original audio from the camera. It wouldn't surprise me if there's just some setting to change or some way around this, but I haven't personally found it yet, and it was just something that I thought was kind of odd. Overall, the feature is awesome, but I could see that being a pretty huge downside to some people's workflow, not knowing where the original audio was. Now, speaking of audio, one thing that I really love in Resolve and have always wondered why Premiere Pro doesn't do this is if you drag the little rubber band up and down on your audio, it actually adjusts the audio levels as you drag it. This is a great indicator of what's happening to your audio. Is it clipping? Is it not clipping? Whereas in Premiere Pro, if you drag that, nothing happens. It doesn't show you that there was any change, but it clearly did get raised up in volume. And it's also nice when you're keyframing, because if you make like a little ramp or dip for your audio, you can actually see that dip inside of your waveform, and it's just a great indication of what's happening there. Whereas in Premiere Pro, you can see the keyframes, which is not a bad indication, but I feel like it makes way more sense to just show you the actual audio waveform dipping. So definitely a huge thumbs up to Resolve actually showing you what's happening to your audio on the timeline. So the next thing I want to talk about is just how Resolve generally wants you to work, because in some ways I think it's nice, and in other ways I think it's just a pretty big hindrance. Inside of Premiere Pro, you can customize your workspace however you want. In fact, on my ultra-wide monitor back here, that's pretty much the only monitor I use for Premiere Pro because it holds almost all of the windows that I need access to at any given moment. Now, with Resolve, you really can't change the workspaces very much. They give you a very small amount of customization, but with Premiere, you can literally put any window wherever you want at any size with lots of customization options. You just don't have that inside of Resolve. Resolve is very dependent on you using the different workspace tab. So for example, if you want to import media, you're going to have to use the media tab. I don't believe you can import media in any of the other tabs in Resolve. If you want to do any timeline editing, you need to do that from the edit or cut page, which so far, I haven't used the cut page. It seems to be just a much more stripped down timeline and isn't really how I like to edit. I'm sure I'll explore it more in the future, but so far I don't like the cut page at all. I've strictly stayed on the edit page. But anyways, then once you go to the color page, you can't add any more clips to your timeline from the color page. You have to go back to the edit page, add anything you want, and then back to the color page. Whereas in Premiere Pro, I could have the Lumetri color panel open and my timeline and my project bin. So I can add media, color it, do whatever I want. So far to me, it has just felt really limiting not having access to all the tools that I want on screen at once. In some ways, I think it's nice because it can keep you really focused and you can go from left to right. You import your media, you edit, you color, you do your sound design, you export. That workflow makes sense, but it isn't necessarily how I like to work. There are a lot of things that I had to find myself going to one of those pages and then having to go back. For example, masking inside of Resolve, if you wanted to do like a mask transition to reveal a clip wiping by, you can't do that from the edit page. You have to go to the color page, add a node, then you have to right click, add alpha output, and then you can do all your masking inside of there. And it feels weird having to go to the color page to do that. Now that I'm aware of how it works, it makes sense and I get it, but it doesn't feel that great. In Premiere Pro, I could just open my effects control panel and do all the masking I want. I didn't have to go to a whole new mode in order to do that masking. And I don't remember all of the other instances, but there were a lot of times where I found myself going, why do I have to go to this page to do this? Why can't I just do it from the edit page? And if Resolve would let you customize the workspace more, I could just have all the panels open at once. But they don't let you do that, and honestly, I find that annoying and a pretty big limitation of Resolve. With having 3 monitors back here, I just feel like I'm limited to using those how Resolve wants me to use them instead of how I want to use them. Another small thing on that note when it comes to workspaces, when it comes to the media tab or even the edit page, I really don't like how Resolve uses their bins. Inside of Premiere Pro, I'm almost always in list view. Occasionally I will go to icon view, but I personally prefer being in list view. In Premiere, I can twirl down a bin and I can see all of the media. Now, if I want, I can twirl down another bin and see all of that media at once, and I can drag and drop between bins very easily. Inside of Resolve, it doesn't work that way. If I click inside of one bin, I no longer have access to seeing what's inside of my other bins. I need to click out of this one and then click into the next one in Resolve, and I find this just annoying. Maybe I shouldn't care and maybe it doesn't bother other people, but the way I like to work and move my media around or just look at my media, I prefer to do it the way Premiere does it, and I really don't like that Resolve doesn't even give you an option. You're just kind of stuck with what they give you, and I find that looking at my media and going between different bins quickly is just slower in Resolve. All right, so now with most of the big things out of the way, let's talk about some of the small things that I like and dislike. Starting with the things that I like, I absolutely love that Resolve in the metadata columns will tell you the codec you shot with as well as the bitrate, because in Premiere Pro, this information isn't hard to get, but it's also not easy. I cannot tell you the amount of times I'm trying to ask someone what codec they shot in, and they have no idea and they don't know how to enable it inside of Premiere or figure out where that information is. And as far as bit depth goes, Premiere doesn't even have a built-in way to show you the bit depth without using external plugins, and that I find very annoying, so it's awesome that Resolve has this built in. Another thing I really like is when it comes to markers, they have something called annotations, which actually let you draw on the screen, which could be awesome for notes, especially if you were working in a collaborative environment. This would allow someone to drop some notes for you, and then you could go back to them and visually look on the screen and you could see, oh, okay, he drew in the area that I needed to darken, whereas in Premiere, you could leave a marker and you might just say, darken the right half of the frame, and looking at the frame, you might not really know exactly which part needs to be darkened. So the annotations in Resolve are awesome. Not something I necessarily see myself using or having a big need for, but I think that's an awesome feature that Premiere should definitely copy. Overall, I feel like Resolve also has more effects that are just generally useful. Premiere seems like it has a lot of outdated effects that were, maybe useful like 10, 15 years ago, whereas Resolve has a lot of stuff that seems like it would be pretty up to date. You have a video call effect, which can simulate being in like a Zoom call online. You have a DSLR camcorder type thing where it'll put a little border on the screen and show you the recording settings. There's just lots of things like that in Resolve that just seem more modern and something that a filmmaker would actually use today, whereas Premiere doesn't feel like it has a whole lot of that. There are plenty of awesome effects in Premiere, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of really outdated ones that I don't really know why exist anymore. Now this one is annoying or nice depending on who you ask. I kind of fall in between, and that's if you want to do a time lapse in Resolve. Once you go to your media storage and you find the folder with all your images, Resolve will automatically show it to you as a video clip. It doesn't show it to you as all the images, so now you can import it right away and it's just a video clip. You didn't have to do any extra steps. But the annoying thing is, let's say you had 2 images from your camera and they were still images that you wanted to use. Well, if those names are sequential, like coming out of Lightroom, Resolve is going to try and import that as a time lapse. You can avoid this by coming over to the 3 dots and say show individual frames, and then you can see the individual frames, but some people might view this as an extra step and see it as annoying. So realistically, the way Premiere does this and the way Resolve does it, basically just about the same, but I do think it's a little bit more intuitive in Resolve than it is inside of Premiere. So those are some of the small things that I really enjoy in Resolve. Now let's talk about some of the things that just really confused and annoyed me. All right, so next I want to talk about Resolve's keyboard viewer because I honestly just think it's terrible, at least in comparison to Premiere. The first thing is that in Premiere, when you open up the keyboard shortcut viewer, by looking at the letters on the keyboard, you can see the shortcut that is mapped to them. And I think that's really handy to be able to see at a quick glance. In Resolve, it's just a keyboard and nothing else. You have to click on the letter that you want to see what something is mapped to, and then you can see a list of things, which may or may not be a huge deal to you, but I really liked being able to see things at a quick glance. Now, the next thing that really just drives me nuts about Resolve's keyboard shortcut viewer is if you remap a shortcut and the letter you chose was in use by something else, it won't unmap the original shortcut. So now those two keyboard shortcuts conflict, and either you won't be able to use either of them when you save, or you'll be able to use one in one panel but not another. And this drives me nuts because next to the keyboard shortcut, it's going to show you a yellow triangle that's like, hey, yeah, there's a problem with this, but if you click it, nothing happens. I just want Resolve to unmap the other shortcut, or at least take me to the other shortcut and give me the option to unmap it. Right now what happens is I either have to search for the effect name, or somehow I have to find it in the shortcut viewer and then unmap it. And don't even get me started on Resolve search for their shortcuts, because this has given me so many problems and been so annoying that I have had to take a break from remapping my shortcuts because the whole process was just so annoying inside of Resolve. Personally, DaVinci Resolve's keyboard shortcut manager is a huge thumbs down for me. Honestly, it's probably one of the things that I like least about the program so far, which is unfortunate for me because I'm a huge keyboard shortcuts guy. So this is something that I like to live in a lot and remap and tinker with. Now, one thing that was really hard to get used to and confused me really badly coming from Premiere Pro is once a timeline is created, whatever frame rate you selected, the timeline is stuck in that frame rate. There is nothing you can do to change the frame rate of that timeline. If you accidentally made a timeline in 60 frames a second and then realized later, oops, I didn't want to do that, I want it to be 24 FPS, well, you're out of luck. You just can't change it. It's stuck the way it is. Which means if you want to fix this, you need to create a second timeline, uncheck the project settings box, set a custom frame rate, and then copy your other timeline and paste it into the new one. Now, I realize that from the beginning, you should set your timeline settings properly, and that isn't really an issue for me, but I've definitely had instances in the past where I wanted to be able to change my frame rate of my timeline on the fly, and you just can't do that in Resolve. So that was just something that was weird, and if it's something you rely on, be prepared for it to be annoying in Resolve because it annoyed me. It's not so bad now that I know how it works, but still, why the heck can you not change it? Now here's one that's driving me crazy, and I spent multiple hours trying to figure this out. But Resolve does something weird with one of the macros that I use in Premiere Pro all the time, and that's my instant scrub macro. And basically all this macro does is when I press the button, it will teleport the mouse to the scrubbable area on the timeline and then virtually hold down the left mouse button. And then all I have to do is drag the mouse left and right and it will scrub on the timeline. So what this looks like for me is I press a button, I can drag the mouse left and right and I'm scrubbing all I want. And then once I'm done, I click the left mouse button and the mouse will go back to where it was before I started scrubbing. I love this macro, use it thousands and thousands of times a day. And for whatever reason, trying to make the same thing in Resolve doesn't work. And I cannot figure out why. And I feel like it's some limitation or some conflict between Keyboard Maestro and Resolve. Whenever I use it, it will move the mouse there, click down for a split second, and then it just lets go. Whereas the same thing works just fine in Premiere Pro. And I also actually found another program that I thought would help solve this called Dwell Click. And basically what this does is if I press a key, it will virtually hold down the left mouse button until I let go or until I press that key again. Well, if you do that in Resolve, what happens is Resolve actually thinks you're trying to do a right click. Whereas if I do this anywhere else on the computer, it will hold down the left click button and let me drag stuff all over wherever. But in Resolve, it thinks I'm right-clicking. So I don't know if this is a bug in Resolve or a conflict or what it is, but this is a macro I love, and I am absolutely going to lose my mind if I cannot do the same thing in Resolve. I had to give up on it because I spent multiple hours trying to fix this, and I just wasn't making any progress. So we'll see. I can't say that it's exclusively Resolve's fault, but it works perfectly fine in Premiere Pro and any other program, so I have no idea what Resolve is doing, but it's really annoying not having that macro. Also, let's talk about issues in Resolve, because everyone who switches from Premiere Pro to Resolve goes,
Oh my goodness, there are no bugs in Resolve. It is a perfect video editor. Premiere Pro is so bad, I never have a glitch in Resolve. It's perfect.
And oh my goodness, this couldn't be further from the truth. So first of all, in this first week of using Resolve, I crashed more in this week than I have with Premiere Pro in probably the last 3 to 6 months, or maybe even a year combined. Ever since getting Premiere Pro set up properly, crashing has stopped being an issue for me. I know people love to complain about it, but to be honest with you guys, most of the issues that I solve for people with Premiere Pro is a user workflow issue. I'm not saying that Premiere Pro doesn't have issues, because it certainly does have its issues, but when you have your cache drive set up, you're using a proper system for editing that isn't underpowered, you're editing from external drives, all the things that add to a proper workflow, you stop having issues. And most of the time when I help people out, those issues go away. Now in Resolve, I've had plenty of issues, and I'll throw up on screen some of the issues I had. I actually recorded with my phone anytime I had an issue, so let's go ahead and watch some.
I don't think I'm going to be able to massively proficient at using DaVinci Resolve. Now, I'm not an idiot. I don't think I'm going to be able to massively proficient at using proficient at using DaVinci Resolve. Now, I'm not an idiot. I don't think I'm proficient at using DaVinci Resolve. Now, I'm not an idiot. I don't think I'm going to be.
Oh, don't worry, guys. Resolve is a flawless editor. It has no issues, guys. It's so much better than Premiere Pro. Oh, look, you play a clip and your screen starts flickering. Oh, it's perfect, guys. So much better than Premiere. The Resolve saga continues. So I like to listen to my interviews at 2 times speed because, you know, you get through them quicker. Well, I was playing it at 2 times speed. Now we're going to play it back at regular speed, and now look what it does.
It's down to Florida with you, and we can go hit the big lake down there, which is the ocean.
It's looping one line at 2 times speed, but playing the rest at normal speed. The heck is that? So as you guys can see, I had some pretty odd and unexplainable issues, and anytime I rebooted Resolve, the issues would go away, but they still happened regardless. So when people try and tell me, oh yeah, Resolve has no issues, that's honestly just a complete lie. I've had plenty of issues in Resolve so far, and I will be willing to give it the benefit of the doubt and say that I don't have it properly set up yet. I've done some research to get Resolve set up how I believe it should be, but who knows? Maybe I've done something wrong and I'll learn more and be able to fix that. But for all the people who tell you guys, oh, Resolve is so much better and it never crashes, in my experience so far, that's just not true. Oh man, so that was a lot of information, but that's been my first week of Resolve so far. Like I said, there was a lot of other things I learned about, like multicam and a bunch of other things, but it's just stuff that I don't really feel is going to be relevant information right now. But so far in my first week of Resolve, I think the program has a lot of things going for it, but there's also just a lot of things that to me feel like basic functions for an NLE that Resolve doesn't do or are just more annoying to perform in Resolve. So yeah, I'm curious to see how these next few weeks go. I'm sure as I learn more about some of the workflows and the ways Resolve wants you to do things, things will feel better, but man, it's definitely not easy learning another NLE, and that's coming from someone who loves to learn about this stuff. So we'll see how it goes over the next few weeks, and I'll make sure to keep you guys updated, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.